welcome to the Preemie Chats. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, or CPBF. We are a charitable organization, and our mission is to empower families of premature babies through support and education. This Preemie Chat series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here, every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us the experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpreemies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. And today, to mark Self-Care Day on July 24th, we are going to talk about self-care and the important role it plays leading a healthy lifestyle. Our topic today is the art of caring for yourself, Parents Edition. Most of us intellectually understand that parents must take care of themselves in order to care for their children. But are you really taking this seriously? Are you really listening to our bodies and giving them what they need? This presentation addresses the concept of guilt and provides ways in which parents can tend to their own needs guilt-free. Parents of premature babies will be a primary focus, although all elements of this conversation can apply to any and all parents. Elements on our agenda include alleviating guilt, seeking compassion, asking for discretion, accepting emotions, letting go of traditions, and finding customized coping mechanisms. And I have here joining me from Montreal, Ana Maria Tosco, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and psychology lecturer with over 15 years of experience. She has 2 master's degrees in the field of psychology and has studied and worked in a variety of Canadian provinces. She's a regular contributor to the Suburban newspaper and has been a guest expert on major outlets such as CTV and Global. Today, Ana Maria is thrilled to have begun a new project. Her mandate, making psychological concepts more mainstream to help decrease the stigma around mental illness and increase help seeking when needed. She hopes to prove that there are interesting, unintimidating, and normalizing explanations behind what we do and why we do it, providing evidence there is no need to perpetuate stigma. And I thank you so much for joining us here today. It's such an honor to have you sharing your expertise. I'm so grateful that you agreed to be with us today.
It's an honor to be here, Fabiana. I know what you and your team are doing at CPBF, and I'm thrilled. And I know I've told you this before, you know, professionally, this speaks to me, but of course, personally, the reason why I hold this really close to my heart, and any conversation or any time I can have with you, I hold it so close to my heart because of my own story with my preemie baby, who's now 7 and doing well. But
I'll
never forget those days.
Absolutely. They stay with us forever. And we are going to talk about that during your Q&A. But let's go to your presentation now. And then we have the questions at the end of your presentation. The floor is yours, Ana.
Thanks, Fabiana. So hi, everyone. In the name of honoring, celebrating International Self-Care Day, I thought that I would talk about not only my professional experience, but my personal experience. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work with high functioning adults. I've also worked with a few premature moms. I am a mom who gave birth prematurely, so I do want to tell you about my story. But the whole idea behind this presentation is to give you not only professional information, but personal information as to how we, as parents who have been through something traumatic, how can we care for ourselves in that very kind of confusing time. So a little bit about me briefly. In October 2014, I gave birth to my eldest daughter now, Calliope May, on October 18th, 2014. Due to a placenta previa, a very low-lying placenta, I had to be given an emergency C-section. Basically, with a placenta previa, there's a lot of bleeding that happens, and the bleeding can be managed until it's no longer manageable. And at that point, on October the 18th, 2014, the doctor said, Anna Maria, it's not manageable anymore. Now it's a very precarious situation. We want you to be safe. We want your baby to be safe. So today is when your baby will be born via C-section. So she is thriving, and she did, pass all of the tests with flying colors. Still, those moments were traumatic, and I'm still working through some of that trauma. So it's my pleasure now to tell you again, not only professionally, but personally, how can we care for ourselves as parents? First, I'd like to say that I hope by this time, everybody knows this analogy. Okay, we therapists, we use it. It's almost like our bread and butter at some points. You must put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I hope everybody knows this airplane analogy. You can't help anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself first. You can't give when your pockets are empty. You can't go when your gas tank is empty. You must put the oxygen mask on yourself first, not only for yourself, but also for all of you relentless caregivers out there. If you really do want to help other people, you have to take care of yourself first. Otherwise, you will be good to no one. So one of the biggest blockages here to, parents taking care of themselves oftentimes is guilt, and which I'm going to talk about in a second. But it is, part of the battle in proper self-care is realizing that there's likely guilt involved if you're not doing it. And so it is about alleviating that guilt. So I want to talk about that as my next point here. So, we all have our caretaker roles. Some of us, let's say, have a team of 7 people under us at work, and we're the manager. Or maybe we coach a little league, or maybe we tutor, or maybe we, we watch our neighbors' pets every week, or something like this. We have these caregiving roles. And when you need help, or when you are in crisis, you have to be able to let go of these roles. You have to be able to alleviate your guilt, because guess what? Your team is going to be okay in your absence. You are undermining their power and their resilience. If you think that your presence is necessary, if you think you need to fix, if you think you need to save anybody, they will all be okay. And moreover, you are still a good person. You are still worthy. You are still reputable. You still have that good reputation, even if you have to take a moment to take care of yourself because you are going through something very significant. Be it a traumatic birth, or be it anything, be it a death in the family, anything. When you need the time, everybody is going to be okay. And you are still that same person with integrity and worthiness and a great reputation. In order to alleviate guilt, we have to remember that. So letting go of your other caregiving roles, and even some responsibilities and duties that you have, right? When you need to focus on yourself, you organize your bill payments in a different way. You might need help. You might, ask a family member to help you out. Everything at a certain point is okay. You need to let it go, and then you need to focus on you, because you are still that person with a lot of integrity and good intention. You just need some time. Something else, and this really applies to me personally, when I gave birth to Calliope prematurely. It applies to me personally, but I've also been inspired by other moms that I spoke to, other preemie moms. I heard a story once that some individuals are a little bit anxious or concerned that they don't want to reach out to, let's say, their sister or their best friend, because unfortunately, for whatever reason, that friend or that close family member doesn't necessarily have the skills or the wherewithal or the compassion or the understanding to be a good audience. And that's okay. When we go through something extraordinary, not everybody is going to be as compassionate or as sensitive. Not everybody is going to know what to say. So I remember having this conversation with someone and say, hey, it's not a bad thing. You are not a bad person or a bad sister or a bad friend if you decide to take some of that information, take some of your emotions, and actually bring it over to somebody else. Normally, you always go to your best friend, and she knows that, and you guys do that for each other. But in some instances, if your best friend kind of is uncomfortable or isn't equipped or doesn't know what to say, then you might, again, in a guilt-free way, go over to somebody else who might have more of a compassionate ear or a bit of an understanding. Maybe they have some experience. So please don't feel guilty about reaching out to other compassionate people who might be a better audience than your best friend or your family member about this issue. No reason to feel bad about it. This is not you being angry with your sister. This is just realizing, oof, this is not her thing. I'm gonna actually reach out to that colleague I speak to at work. Very open-minded, very compassionate. We always have great conversations, and I think she can help me. If that's the case, don't feel bad about it. Go do it. Your sister will always be there, but she might not always be the right audience, and that's okay. Reaching out to others with a similar story. So again, personally, we had a friend who gave birth to her son prematurely about 6 months before I did. We love this person. Is she my best friend? Is she my sister or my cousin? No, she's not. But I reached out to her, and because we bonded at that point. She came to the hospital. I remember that moment. I can be brought to tears when I think about it. I ran over to her and I hugged her, and I remember snotting all over her neck because I was sobbing and crying, but just having her there, knowing what she went through, and now knowing that I was going through the same thing. I mean, that's a bond for life. Whether we're best friends or not, just reaching out to her did wonders for my well-being. So I definitely encourage you to reach out to others with a similar story. Now, if you don't know, first of all, if it's, let's say, somebody twice or 3 times removed, maybe it's your brother's, sister-in-law's cousin or something like that, go for it. Go for it. You could do that. Otherwise, let's not turn our nose up at Facebook forums. Sometimes there are some really nice communities that form on social media platforms. I don't always want to turn my nose at it and be wary of trolls. Sometimes there are these nice forums, and a supportive, compassionate environment can take place there. Also, don't underestimate the bonds you make in the maternity ward, right? I will never forget the women I met. I've reached out to the women I met, and it's always such a pleasant conversation. I have fond memories of them, bittersweet at times, of course, but we shared something really special. And while we are not, again, we're not best friends, but there is the potential to make even lifelong friends from the relationships you form on the maternity ward. It's just great, great support. So don't hesitate to reach out to others with similar stories. Another thing, when it's a crisis situation after birth or something happens to your child, well, in particular here, I'm talking about giving birth under precarious situations. Asking for discretion is absolutely your right. Family members might want to celebrate the birth of your child. You might not yet be ready. Based on everything you've been through, you might not be ready to do that. So I want, in the name of self-care, do not be shy and do not hesitate. It's absolutely okay to say, please don't, talk about the birth of my child publicly. Please don't overtly celebrate online and go telling everybody, we're not ready yet. We'll let you know. So that's something that can also do wonders for caring for yourself, because the emotions are complicated, and you have every right to ask for time for you to process this journey further before people start celebrating, even before you can. So yeah, on that note, our emotions are complicated. And in a situation like that, I mean, there's ups and downs, and you run the gamuts of the emotion scale, if you will. And the best thing I can say there is to please don't avoid or discard or ignore emotions. Best thing to do with those emotions is to bear witness to them, accept them, acknowledge, especially the negative ones, that they're temporary. But please don't avoid. I can't tell you, now this is me talking as a psychologist here. I can't tell you how much anxiety, for example, can decrease when someone is aware of their emotions. Some personal examples I even tell my clients, and I don't mind telling you guys here. I had a reaction. Obviously, whenever there's a school shooting, there's big reactions. And I'm actually going to refer to one that happened years ago in 2018, the Parkland school shooting. And that week, I remember being very anxious. I remember having intrusive thoughts. I remember worrying that I was going to, turn my car and hurt someone, and just on. I was calling my kids' daycare. How are they? How are they? And then my husband turned to me. Poor guy's married to a psychologist. No, but he's great. He turned to me and said, "Hey, does this have to do with the school shooting?" And I didn't realize it. But the next morning, I decided to allow my emotions because I was repressing them. And I remember watching a news report about the school shooting and hysterically bawling. And I hadn't realized that I was repressing with all of my strength how sad I was, how scared I was, how confused I was, how angry I was. So just allowing that to emerge, the awareness of that, allowed for my anxiety to come down. My bizarre kind of irrational behavior that week didn't change everything, but that behavior did in fact decrease. I can't tell you how therapeutic it is to be aware of your emotions, because when you're aware of them, your anxiety can come down. Because anxiety is very confusing. And in truth, some psychologists believe that repressed emotions are at the heart of anxiety. So when you allow those emotions to emerge, the anxiety comes down. Give it a try. It's really great for self-care. Something else that I experienced, having a baby shower when my baby was already born. I thought of this when I was preparing for this presentation because some people are very traditional and they like to abide by the traditions of their family, of their culture, and that's beautiful and that's wonderful. However, when you've given birth to a child prematurely or when there's a crisis situation, the rules are out the window at that point. You have to make your own rules. And if you decide maybe to not have a baby shower, oftentimes premature moms are saying the nursery wasn't even ready and baby came out. There are no rules anymore at that point. You are creating your own rule book. You are making those guidelines. It's all you, and it all depends on what you need and what your baby needs and what your partner needs at that point. All rules are out the window. And in a way, just saying that, it's so relieving. There's nothing you have to officially and necessarily do. You are making all of the guidelines and all of the rules for what you do, be it for a baby shower, be it for your baby's first birthday. Traditions do not have to be abided by entirely at all. You're making the rules. Finally, finding your own personal coping mechanisms. We all know, I think at this point, breathing is a great coping mechanism, is a great self-care behavior. We know that taking a few minutes for yourself, we know that maybe going for a walk, something like this, what the textbooks say, do work. But at a certain point, you then have to realize, what do I really want to do? What are my tailored, customized coping mechanisms? What really helps me? And the textbooks can't tell you that. You have to listen to yourself. My husband, when we were in the hospital, part of his coping mechanisms was to look at all of the machinery and all of the devices and all the medical equipment in my daughter's hospital room and to understand them all. He probably could even manipulate them if he was allowed to, but that was his way of coping. It was very useful as well, but it was his way to bring his anxiety down, to feel good, to feel positive, to feel hopeful. That was his way, and that was very cool. For me, I loved to sing to my baby. I loved to, hold her at the end of the day. I think my go-to song was Elton John's Your Song. and I was, the world was wonderful now that she was here. So I was singing that song to her. I love to sing. And when I did that, it just was so soulful to me. And there was even something healing about that and beautiful. That was one of my coping mechanisms. And it was very personal to me. So I encourage all of you to not just read the textbooks and not just read those kind of headliners on the internet of what you should do for self-care. Tap into what you love, tap into what you do, and then use that as part of your therapy, as part of your self-care. So thank you so much for your attention. That's my email address there if anybody wants to reach out to me. I also, I was telling Fabiana, I also have a website or a brand that I created, the name of Teaching Psychology. You can find that at www.sassypsychologist.com. It's more like a teaching website to make psychological concepts more approachable. So thanks again, everyone. And thanks, Fabiana. That was so much fun.
Ana Maria, thank you so much for, first of all, sharing your personal experience with prematurity. I think we can all relate to the traumatic birth here, in our community. All the parents are watching us today, and how long that trauma remains with us. So thank you so much for that. So I want to go back to the beginning of your presentation. We talk about putting your oxygen mask.
Yeah. Have you heard of that one before, Fabiana? Have you heard it?
A few times over the last 10 years. But I have to tell you why and ask you, why is it so hard, particularly for moms to do it?
I really have to say, my hypothesis is that the blockages towards putting the oxygen mask on ourselves first has something to do with guilt and what we've learned early on. So there's almost something, and this is just a hypothesis, right? You can get another opinion out there, of course, but for me, I feel people think that they are not sufficient, they are not good enough, unless they are somehow sacrificing, unless they are bleeding out to care for their child. On some level, some of us learned early on, be it in our families, or be it in our culture, or being in our traditions, or be it in with our peers, who knows? But that self-sacrificing is what's admirable, it's what's necessary, and that's what makes me good. And I know, I'm very open about this too. I'm open about this with my family. I think I learned this from all of the beautiful and strong women in my family, but there is a little bit of self-sacrificing that I don't think is healthy. And so I'm trying to teach this to my family too. Like, hey, just because you're not sacrificing yourself doesn't mean you're less than. My hypothesis is that somewhere along the line, we learned that. And so when we aim to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, there is this, oh, that's wrong. I can't do that. I have to bleed. I have to bleed bright red to show my worthiness. And that's just not true.
I hear you out and clear, loud and clear. I also, in my case, I totally feel this was passed down to me from my mother's side, because I saw my grandmother doing that, my mother doing that for us. And I feel I'm still trapped on that pattern. And how to break the pattern, I think, is the hardest thing to do, is work in progress.
You and I have that in common. It's the exact same situation there. I see my mother and I see her sisters, who are beautiful people with big hearts, but there's too much sacrifice. It doesn't have to be like that. You are still beautiful. You are still worthy. You are still amazing without working so hard,
Yeah, and one thing that you did mention is the caregiving role, to let go of that caregiving. And I think for a lot of us in this community, especially the parents will have further diagnosis when the child has a disability or any other medical complexity, we do take that role of the caregiver. You are no longer, in my mind, not just, but the parent, but you are the parent and the caregiver in this specific role to care for the medical needs of that child. And I think that a lot of us in that situation, we totally forget about ourselves. And there is a thing you hold on so tight, because in a lot of our situations, you feel that the only person who can actually take care of that child. And I think when you talk about let go and give away that piece to somebody else so you can take care of yourself, because you cannot run an empty vessel for for such a prolonged period of time, because this is for life. It's not a particular period that you are there for 2-3 months. This is a life situation.
Exactly. And the thing is, based on just what we were talking about a few minutes ago, God forbid we are someone who has learned that self-sacrifice is the way. And then we find ourselves in a situation that not only are we a parent, but we're also a caregiver. Then, it's grim if we cannot find a way to care for ourselves. It's grim if we cannot let go of those things that we learned early on that are actually hurting us. So yeah, at that point, like I said, that would be that wouldn't be a great recipe if we're someone who thinks sacrifice is the way, and then to be a parent and a caregiver. That person needs the boundaries. That person needs those customized, tailored self-care coping mechanisms. Otherwise, it's grim.
Okay, so let's talk about the self-care coping mechanism, because I come from a very different background and culture that self-care for us, it is more than going to a manicure and pedicure, right? So when I see some moms say, I'm going to go for my pedicure because it's my self-care time. For me, that's not a self-care. Or it could be for somebody else because you're taking an hour for yourself to do a pedicure. But how do we say, okay, this is a self-care for me? How do we identify what is self-care for you and what is your coping strategies? And if you are on a good path to renew, to gain some energy back, to clear your mind or close some tabs in your head.
Yeah.
So how do we identify those things?
I love that you're asking that question. So it's funny, I'm always going back to that first thing we talked about, but let's say that we are someone who is the self-sacrificer. If we have that kind of profile, we are not used to tapping into our hearts and tapping into our souls to remember what we love. So my advice to answer that question is you really do have to tap into your personal heart, your soul. What is soulful for you? And too many of us don't know anymore. Fabiana, I have to disclose, this week, because I am making self-care a priority for myself this summer, I'm doing something I haven't done in 20 years. And I am weekly going to my salsa classes. I haven't done it since I was in my 20s. And this Monday, I just signed up. I paid for some classes here, and I'm going all summer, every Monday, because I remembered somehow that I had some space. I had some reflection. I had it in my breathing time or my meditation time. That's what's soulful to me. Why aren't I doing it? And so I understand that logistics have to be in place. I understand that, I have to be free on Monday nights. I know all of that is in place, but I'm just saying, please tap into what's soulful for you. Because I just think so many of us forget as we get older. We don't remember. And that's my soul. If you see me dancing, it's like my heart is right on the outside of my body. I'm smiling. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but that's,
No, I get that. It's true, because we are in this adult life, and you forget to play, right? And you forget what makes us feel alive. And many years ago, I went to this aliveness workshop, and then having to write down what makes you feel alive. And I realized so many of the things that I loved doing, I wasn't doing because I was so caught up in my caregiver role. I think that I was doing the best that I could, but I totally forgot to fill my vessel, to be able to give all of it to my child. But Anna, let's go back to the trauma piece, because we are talking about, coming from a traumatic birth experience, whether it was at birth and the baby spent a few weeks in an ICU or months in an ICU. Mm-hmm. It was traumatic, right? A lot of us were not expecting that or further diagnosis. So how do we cope with that trauma? Because I know a lot of people have to go or choose to go to professional help. Others don't. And you also say to acknowledge the feelings, don't avoid the complicated emotions, let them emerge. So how do we deal with that trauma? When do we know it's time to look for professional help? Because of the self-care strategies or coping mechanisms not helping.
So a few things I want to say that were going through my head at that point, but one of the things I like to say when we are experiencing symptoms that are very significant and severe. So whether we're talking about, post-traumatic stress or severe symptoms of depression, let's say, to seek professional help or when to seek professional help, you do so when you realize you're drowning. So what that means is how are you eating? How are you sleeping? Are you able to communicate? You don't have to communicate with your second and third cousins, or just yet, but are you being able to communicate with the people you are closest to at the moment? So it's if the things you did in your regular life after giving birth, of course, so you're on leave, right? But if you can't eat, if you're not really speaking, if you can't communicate, if you're not sleeping well, that's when you know that your symptoms are strong enough that they could hurt you and you might be drowning in them. And so when my clients are drowning in their symptoms, that's a surefire sign to get some help.
Yeah, and it's something that we know it's not wide available all over for everyone. And I just want to remind of the parents and the professionals watching us today that we are offering 4 free therapy sessions for families. We know it's not a long-term solution, but we feel that 4 sessions, it can help with some families with some strategies. And if they need further referrals, the professionals can refer them, because we all understand the impact of the ICU. There's so much evidence out there on the long-term impact and the triggers. So let's talk a little bit about the triggers, because 10 years later, there are few things that still trigger me. And sometimes I'm hosting those sessions and I want to share a story, and I feel very emotional, and it's been 10 years exactly. So where are they stored in us, and how do you deal with them?
I love that you expressed that, because if I may disclose as well, and Fabiana knows this, but I, was working, because it's just so touching to know that you're giving away 4 free sessions to parents of premature babies. I loved that, and I signed on. But just to let the viewers know, I had to remove myself from the roster because I got triggered as well. So we both have that in common. It does seem like those triggers do pop up. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I personally, I think that with wounds, they run deep. And I don't know, maybe this resonates with you as well. As time has gone on, I'm very surprised at how much my anxiety has decreased. I used to have a lot of intrusive thoughts, and I'm not saying time heals everything. I don't want to be kind of cliched like that. But with trauma, there is something about time that I thought was really valuable. As far as the other stuff, I do believe that healing is possible. I do believe that we don't necessarily have to get triggered moving forward. But can I tell you where it's stored? No. But I can tell you that with wounds, they run deep, and they likely affected something psychologically deep within. And so conversations with a good therapist who's willing to do some emotion-focused therapy, who's willing to do strategies like the empty chair technique, in which you are talking to an empty chair, but in that chair, it could be your previous self, your future self, your critical voice. It could be your baby. It could be your child in the future. But there is something there that's still fragile and still wounded. So it does have to be a kind of profound type of emotion-focused therapy, I believe, moving forward. For me as well. I had to do an empty chair with my therapist the other day, Fabiana. I'm a psychologist, but I have a psychologist too.
Wow. And I thank you so much for sharing that. And to be honest with you, I was in awe when you actually wrote me the email. You said, I have to withdraw from the program. And I really appreciate that, because sometimes we keep pushing through that, and it is not healthy. And I think that is a big piece of self-care, to recognize where the emotions are still present, what is still triggering, deal with them, and then you see what happens in the future, right? But I think what you said in your presentation, acknowledge, don't avoid them. It's so important. I think it's a step 1 to make them conscious. Just don't put under the rug, because one day they will surface somehow, I believe. And I'm not a psychologist, but
absolutely. You know, Fabiana, ever since I learned that, even with benign things, if I may, really quick, we went on a family vacation, and I was very excited about it, but I didn't realize that underneath there were these kind of negative worries and emotions that I was completely ignoring. And one day I was laying down in bed and I said, "Wow, you're scared," or "Wow, you're nervous," or "Wow, you're worried about the kids on the plane." And as soon as I did that, there was this, it was like this relief washed over me where the anxiety came down because I identified the emotions. I highly recommend it. At least try it, everybody out there. You know, try it, because you'll be amazed with how much your anxiety can decrease once you realize what your secret emotions are.
Yeah, so I want to touch one more point that you mentioned in your presentation about the peer support. Reached out to others with similar stories. And you said when you reached out to the other mom, you already felt that bond. And that's exactly how I feel with our community, with all the parents who come to us. Like, I think that is the bond that we had from the
get totally.
We are both parents. We get each other. We don't have to even say anything, but we understand on a deep level what it is to be in that situation. So let's talk a little bit about peer support, because here at the foundation, we truly believe in peer support. We offer peer support groups. We have over 2,800 pairs on our Facebook group. And it's such, I see the conversations, and it's almost like a validation that what you feel is real, but it's still okay to feel.
Absolutely.
So how, in your point of view, peer support, where do they fit in the self-care piece?
Yeah. I know, I mean, personally, and I know you know this too, it just did wonders for me. But I was motivated here by hearing somebody's story one time where they were kind of a little bit anxious and worried that they didn't feel comfortable going to their best friend when they always went to their best friend with problems. But that best friend, you know, it's not that she's a bad person, but she didn't have the wherewithal. She didn't have the compassion. She didn't have the understanding to actually, you know, be empathic. So then moving over to peer support is indispensable, because that social support network that you usually have might be able to help you, but sometimes they can't because of how complicated this situation is. So moving over and kind of allowing for these new bonds to form, allowing for women in the maternity ward, or people in a community, or people in a forum, it's absolutely indispensable. You know, everything is normalized. You can, you know, share stories, discuss logistics, and even understand concepts more. You know, with my friend, she was explaining this, she was explaining that, because she was a little bit ahead of me. And so I got support, I got an education, I got validation. It was normalized. I mean, all of that's indispensable. Making that, I would say, you know, after eating and sleeping, I would say maybe it's a third, maybe it's a close second or a third in line, because it's indispensable.
Absolutely. So, and I thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm so grateful that you accept our invitation to share your experience and your knowledge and give you these amazing tips for families that are listening to us today. So thank you.
It's an honor, Fabiana, truly. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. And to all of you watching us live today on our YouTube channel or Facebook page, please, and thank you for joining us. And if the video of today's session and all the videos from our live series are available on our website, which is right here, thecanadianpreemies.org. And I want to thank our sponsor, AstraZeneca, for their ongoing support of our education sessions. And we are a charitable organization, and we believe that through support and education, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their babies. Please visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all our families. And I see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well.